So, what is poetry? Poetry, according to Gill, is more than just a body of great works written long ago, or forms and terms to memorize. Poetry is something that people do, and they do it for real purposes. Poetry is a written way of sharing and expressing one's thoughts, ideas, and feelings. So what does research say? Research says poetry has value. It isn't just whimsical fluff. Poetry contributes to increasing students' reading abilities. It develops phonics awareness and one-to-one correspondence. It develops vocabulary and creates fluency with expression when read aloud repeatedly. Research also says poetry encourages language use and wordplay. It connects reading with writing. It demonstrates the importance of word choice and word order, and it frees students to write creatively. Research also says poetry helps students to learn and apply important content in fun and interesting ways. Poetry comes in many different forms. One form of poetry is rhymed verse. Rhymed verse is simply poetry that rhymes. One example of rhymed verse is a poem by Roger McGuff entitled Miss Moon. Ms. Moon, sitting up in the sky, little old lady rock-a-bye, with a ball of fading light and silvery needles knitting the night. A second form of poetry is free verse. Free verse is simply poetry that doesn't rhyme. It's freely expressed. In this form of poetry, image is of greater importance. One example of free verse is a poem entitled Ocean. Author unknown. As blue as the night sky, as green as the meadow grass, fresh like the blowing breeze, rumbling like thunder in the distance, as cool as summer rain, blue, green, fresh, rumbling, cool, ocean. Another form of poetry is called haiku. A haiku contains 3 lines and 17 syllables. It is also frequently written about nature. One example of a haiku is the poem entitled Harvest by author unknown. Harvest. In the fresh garden, the vegetables grow and bloom until harvest time. Another form of poetry is called a limerick. A limerick contains 5 lines and rhymes. The following is an example of a limerick. Author unknown. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It's just how I feared. 2 owls and a wren, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." Another form of poetry is called concrete. Concrete is poetry that has been arranged on a page to create a picture. The following is an example of a concrete poem entitled The Balloon. Author unknown. The balloon, floating, slowly drifting through the air, above the trees, high into the sky, into the clouds, sailing so high. As you can see, form the image of a balloon with its string, which appears to be floating in the air. Another form of poetry is called acoustic. Acoustic poetry is arranged so that the first letter of each line spells a word when read vertically. In the following example, the words ancient Egypt can be read. Each letter forms a word related to ancient Egypt. A. Archaeologists. N. Nile River. C. Crocodiles. I. Inevitable heat. Eyes shadowed in black. N. Nefertiti. T. Tut. E. Egyptians. G. Great Pyramids. Y. Yellow desert sands. P. Papyrus paper. And T. Tombs of the pharaohs. So, what are the benefits of poetry use? There are three aspects of poetry that serve to make it a useful tool for teachers of any content area, including language arts. The first is accessibility. Poetry, according to Collins, is accessible to all readers and readable by students of varying skills. The second aspect is variety. Poetry is rich in variety and able to address the interests and needs of a diverse group of students. This allows or provides for differentiation of instruction. The third aspect is comprehension. Poetry aids comprehension through the use of imaging. According to Collins, imaging is a comprehensive strategy whereby readers learn to visualize a movie playing while reading. Poetry that contains descriptions can be imaged. So, how can poetry be utilized in the classroom? Poetry can be incorporated into all four instructional patterns of practice. Teachers can share poems with students on topics related to literature focus units and thematic units. Students can read books of poetry as well as other books in literature circles and reading workshops. How else can poetry be utilized in the classroom? Students can write and use poems as projects. Students can write and use poems during writing workshop. And teachers can also choose to create what's called a poetry workshop. What is a poetry workshop, you ask? A poetry workshop is nothing more than a reading and or writing workshop with a focus on poetry. During the reading workshop component, students read and respond to poems. During the writing component of the workshop, students write and edit poems. Poetry workshop implementation. The overall length of a workshop is dependent upon the teacher. It could last 1 day, 3 days, a week, and so forth. The amount of time spent per day on a workshop is also dependent upon the teacher. It could be a half hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, and so on. Workshop components vary and are also dependent upon the teacher. Workshop components can include a class meeting time, independent reading time, a sharing time, a mini lesson time, and a writing time.